I think it's fascinating that both of the strategies we use came out of tax court cases where somebody prevailed with the IRS, and it opened up this whole planning opportunity for real estate investors.
Hello, and welcome to Ask the Experts. I'm your host, Sean Lichterman, and today I'm joined by my great friend, as well as 1031 exchange specialist, Scott Saunders. Now, there's many great things that go well together in this world. Some say a simple PB&J, apple pie and baseball, even long walks on the beach. But I think there should be a fourth saying to that adage, and that's cost segregation and 1031 exchanges. It's the perfect marriage for CRE investors looking to defer their gains and pay less to Uncle Sam. Now, today, Scott and I will be diving into these two concepts a little deeper. We're going to discuss what cost segregation is, as well as what 1031 exchange is, the requirements and benefits for both, the synergies between both of these concepts, as well as any misconceptions. And at the end, give an example of how the two work well together. Stay tuned. Scott and I, we've been partners in the CRE investing world. Scott, his talents lie in the 1031 exchange, whereas mine lies in cost segregation. And today, on Ask the Experts, we're going to dive into how do these two work in their own rights, but then how also can you, as a CRE investor, really maximize your ultimate savings in the world of CRE investing. So, Scott, please give us a quick intro on your background, 1031. What is it? How you got started? And we'll go from there.
Great. Hey, Sean, great to be with you on this, and I'm looking forward to it. So I'm Scott Saunders. I'm a senior vice president with what's known as a qualified intermediary. So I'm an expert on 1031 exchanges. Believe it or not, Sean, I got into this space back in 1988. So I've been involved with 1031 exchanges, for 30 some years now, helping investors do that. And a 1031 exchange is nothing more than a part of the tax code. It's tax code section 1031. And what it does is it allows any real estate investor, commercial, residential, farmer, landowner, anybody to take any property held for investment and then exchange it for what we call another like kind property, also held for investment. And these properties can also be used in a business, but most of the time, these are investment properties. And the benefit is you're able to defer all capital gain taxes when you do an exchange. So if somebody did a taxable sale, they have potentially four levels of taxes to pay. They pay depreciation recapture at 25%, federal capital gain at 15 or 20, the net investment income tax at 3.8% on net investment income, and then finally, Sean, state taxes, which can be very significant. If you're in California, that's 13.3%. So all four of those are added together in a taxable sale. In a 1031 exchange, if you do it properly, you can defer all of those taxes and really redeploy all of your equity into a better performing investment property.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So just listing off a number of those different tax percentages, it just starts adding up. So this makes sense when you're exiting a building, right? Say you have $1 million capital gain. You're thinking, all right, I'm going to take that. I'm going to put that in my pocket. I'm going to go retire in Tahiti until Uncle Sam says, wait, you owe us for this, you owe us for that, you owe us for that. So really, this exchange process is allowing you to harbor that capital gain, right? Roll that into like you said, a like kind property, and then really shelter that capital gain savings or that capital gain right there entirely. Is there a time limit on this? Kind of talk to us. I guess the requirement, the eligibility. How does one get involved with a 1031 exchange?
Sure. The most common exchange is what's called a delayed exchange. Sometimes you'll hear it called a deferred exchange, sometimes a starker exchange. What happens if I just kind of walk you through the process for the investor? They have a property that they is held for investment or used in their business. They get it listed and then they get the property under contract. Now, prior to closing, and that's really important, you've got to set up a 1031 exchange before you close on a property held for investment. You engage what is called a qualified intermediary. And a qualified intermediary is going to be assigned into the contract They're going to sell the property to the buyer, and then the qualified intermediary receives those proceeds from the sale. That's day zero in a delayed exchange. So you have 45 calendar days to what we call identify the replacement property. So that's called the identification period. Then that investor has another 135 days after that, up to 180 days maximum, to close on property that they've identified. So day zero, you close, proceeds go to the qualified intermediary. You can identify a property or even multiple properties, depending upon the identification rule. And then you've got a maximum of 180 days to close on property identified. And then we just take the proceeds we're holding. We're assigned into the purchase contract as a qualified intermediary. We purchase that property and then have it deeded back to the investor. So that's the most common format. Sean, you can do a simultaneous exchange. Doesn't really happen that often. And there's some more complex variations called reverse exchanges, improvement or reverse improvement, where the qualified intermediary is parked on title. But 97% of all exchanges are going to be a standard delayed exchange, close, have that 45-day window to identify. And by the way, it ends at midnight of the 45th day. So there's a hard deadline. And then there's another 135 days after that, up to 180 to close on that property.
Okay, so still seems like quite a bit of time. So as soon as you close, you've got 45 initial days, and then that money or that capital gain goes into, I guess, like an escrow, right? It's untouchable for that time period. And then you've got up to about 6 months, really a hard deadline of 6 months to find another like kind property to roll that capital gain into, correct?
Correct. You've got 180 days, that's 6 months to close on what you've identified. And one thing, just as a planning opportunity for people watching this and listening, you can start looking for what you want to buy even before you get your property under contract. So that 45-day window happens not when you go under contract, but the actual closing date is what triggers it. And a lot of people start looking for what they want to purchase as they're listing the property that they're selling. So even though those timelines are fixed, you can really start the process a little bit earlier to start looking for desirable replacement properties.
Okay. And my understanding is that you've been involved with 1031 exchanges for quite a while, right? So you can tell us how long you've been involved in. But with your experience, I guess, what are some of the advantages you've seen, some of the commonalities, and even maybe some of the misconceptions you've heard over the years as well?
Yeah, I've been doing it since 1988, so a long, long time, Sean. So a long time. One of the misconceptions that I see, and unfortunately, even some CPAs and tax advisors bring this one up, which is, well, capital gain taxes are 20 or 15% today, depending upon your taxable income. Why not just pay the taxes today, because taxes are likely to go up in the future? And Sean, as you know, one of the benefits of an exchange is you can do a 1031 exchange into a property, and you could go into another one and another and another. So there are a lot of investors out there that continue to do 1031 exchanges over and over and over, and they build their portfolio from one smaller property to maybe a larger property. And then maybe they exchange into two properties and four and eight. Now, 30 years down the road, they've got this big real estate portfolio, and the gain is a lot of gain. It all goes back to that first property. But as long as they keep exchanging, they're not paying taxes during their entire lifetime. When they pass away, their heirs then get it with a full step up in basis to the value at the property at the time they pass. So if I were to boil that down, what that means, you don't pay capital gain taxes throughout your lifetime. You pass on that highly appreciated property to your heirs, and they don't pay capital gain taxes. So the common misconception is, well, I'm gonna have to pay the taxes sooner or later, so why not just bite the bullet today? Many real estate investors just exchange over and over, and they might even move up. They might start with a fourplex and go into an eightplex, and then a 16 unit apartment, and then maybe it's an industrial or commercial building. So the type of investment property they own might change throughout their investment time horizon, but the 1031 allows them to really build their portfolio so much faster because they get all of that purchasing power that they can redeploy into better performing properties. So it is a tremendous tax advantage. Sean, it's been in the tax code since 1921, believe it or not. So it's been around a long time, and investors in good economies and in down economies have been using this tax strategy. It is really kind of the tax strategy of choice for people to build wealth when they're disposing of an asset. And maybe we could switch over to kind of your segment. What's neat about a 1031 exchange is that it kind of works hand in hand with a cost segregation study. And they work well together. They're actually kind of almost the perfect marriage. You do a 1031 exchange when you sell a property with gain, but maybe you want to talk a little bit about cost segregation and what do you do when you own an asset, because these two strategies, when you combine them, it's like turbocharging your car, right?
Right.
You can get further with faster, you can get there with less fuel, and you can do it faster, because combining these two strategies it's like rocket fuel in a sense.
Yeah, and I love the segue, especially teeing up for my expertise in cost seg. But a couple of highlights that I heard from your discussion was, one, the strategy that's been around for over 100 years, right? So 1921, 1031's kind of got their first start. And also, what I picked up was, how can Americans create generational wealth? Well, 1031 is really that forced savings plan that helps you get there by acquiring your first unit. And the exit strategy, use 1031 to now purchase a like kind, or in more instances, a greater value property. So now you're being forced in this the strategy to purchase more property. You're harboring your capital gains each time away, and then once you do pass away, look at this entire portfolio in wealth of real estate you've now left to your heirs. I mean, that right there, we can end the show right there, right? You've just created generational wealth for family members to enjoy for kingdom come. When your 401k can't do that, your pension plan can't do that, your HSA can't do that. This really is that fine, like you said, that fine marriage where you can find within investing, happens to be commercial real estate investing, where 1031 exchange will allow you to create that generational wealth. And I appreciate, once again, bringing up cost seg, because that also comes up. I do get that quite squirrely face sometimes when I'm speaking to new clients. Have you heard of cost segregation? Well, no. What is that? Cost seg, for short. Well, in short, right, cost segregation is accelerated form of depreciation. And what that means, it allows you to reduce your tax liability. So why is that great? Well, 1031s we just discussed with Scott on the exit strategy, right? So you sold a property, you got capital gains, you want to harbor that, you want to defer those capital gains taxes as much as you can. Now, cost segregation, when he said, is a great marriage, is because during the marriage, right, we haven't exited the marriage yet, but during the marriage and the ownership of the property, how do I reduce my tax liability? I'm a fully functioning business. I've got income coming in. I've got tax obligations to pay each year. Well, cost segregation is going to allow you to reduce that tax liability. And it does it in a number of ways. One is reclassifying the components within the building. If we look at a commercial building, but let's take like a multifamily building, for instance. Within that building, there are different components, right? There's flooring, there's baseboards, there's structural items, there's HVAC, there's drainage, there's signage, a whole complex items that go into there. Well, all those items then are put down into different categories: 5, 7, and 15-year categories, and 39 for the structural items. Now, cost segregation allows you to identify those 5, 7, and 15-year items, reclassify them as such, and then take early year depreciation expenses from that. Now, when you compare that to the standard model, which would be traditional straight line, you're just taking the purchase price and dividing it by 39 years or 27 and a half, depending on the building. And that is now going based on an accrual basis. But you can see, as you lump sum these 5, 7, and 15-year asset class items, you're now creating this greater tax savings, because within a building, there's anywhere from 20% to 50, 65, hell, sometimes even 100%, depending on the building type of what can be reclassified and then used against as lowering your taxable income or your tax obligation. So we'll get into a little bit of an exercise on how these work in hand, and then obviously the complexities and requirements of how cost seg and 1031s work.
So, Sean, as I hear you describe what a cost segregation study is, what I see is for an investment property owner, it's a powerful strategy while you own an asset to reclassify that, get more tax benefits now, right? With the time value of money when they have more benefit to me. So, cost segregation, you could do that on any asset. You own an asset, you can do a cost segregation study. Where I think is you mentioned the kind of misconceptions. We have people that'll do a 1031 exchange into a new replacement property. So they defer all their capital gain taxes. They buy a larger replacement property. You can go in and do a cost segregation study shortly after you buy it. Come back a month later and reclassify those shorter life schedules on a newly acquired property. So that's where I see the marriage between these two being such a powerful strategy is you get all the benefits of tax deferral and keeping all your equity, not writing a check to Uncle Sam for all those taxes. Then you buy a larger property and then you get the benefits of a cost segregation study on that. And I tell people today, we certainly know inflation's always been around. It probably always will be to some extent. But in an environment where real inflation is running higher than it normally has been, a cost segregation study is even more powerful then, right? Because I get that tax benefit on my current tax return rather than spreading that out over 27 and a half, 40 years. That means I've got more benefit now, which allows me to do what? Shelter my income and go out and buy more real estate today. So that's why it's just a tremendous tax strategy. I've watched for years, Sean, how people are becoming more and more familiar with taking these two concepts and combining them and getting a lot of tax benefits by doing that.
And as an added bonus, let's talk about bonus depreciation for a second. So I've just defined what cost segregation is, right? So we're accelerating depreciation by reclassifying those 5, 7, and 15-year asset class components within a building so you can take those in the earlier years. Now, cost segregation was already a home run every time you're up at bat. But by introducing the concept of bonus depreciation, this turned it into a grand slam. Now imagine you can take those 5, 7, 15-year asset class items and 100% write them off within the first year. That was the concept of bonus. So during the Tax Cut and Jobs Act era, it actually allowed properties purchased after September of 2017 to the end of 2022, this 100% bonus component to cost segregation. So like I said, it took a concept that was already putting tremendous tax savings in the pockets of commercial real estate investors, but now with the added component of bonus depreciation, those commercial real estate investors were now having greater tax advantages within the first year.
They absolutely are. Sean, you mentioned something there. Could you just go a little bit into kind of the different ways? There's kind of two different ways to do a cost segregation study, right? You mentioned the engineering based approach. There's another one. Could you just talk about what those two are and why the engineering based approach is really a better method, a little more defensible in an audit?
Yeah, and not to say anything against the alternative method because there is a place for it, but also like anything, there are more risks involved. So when it comes to cost segregation studies, there's either the engineering-based approach, which is defined by the IRS as an approved method, and then there's what we call a DIY or software-based. Now, the difference between the two, and there are time and places for both. So in a software base, this might be best utilized for the investor who's only purchasing maybe 1 to 2 properties per year. And the cost basis value is nothing more than 200,000, 250, maybe $300,000 properties. And now the reason being is because when you use the DIY software is that it's placing you into a data set pool. So one, the savings, the tax savings may not be as great if you performed an engineering based study. But alternatively, the fee may not be as much. With a DIY software, obviously going to be a lot cheaper than an engineering base because they're putting professionals on the street. Boots are on the street and they're actually analyzing the property. We're documenting it. But in the back end, say for instance, there is an audit that is triggered. Most of what in my opinion, what I've seen is that those DIY softwares will not represent you in the base of an audit. And therefore, you kind of left with your hands up going, well, now I have to pay all these back taxes and possibly any fines. Now, in the sense of an engineering base, what I kind of alluded before, we're putting actual specialists on the ground. They're actually walking the property, they're analyzing, taking pictures. And what that's going to give you at the end of the study is usually a multi-page document, usually 40 plus pages of everything they found within the document. So they're analyzing every nook and cranny, and that's going to the IRS to show that I've crossed my T's, I've dotted my I's. This is the tax savings that I've earned through a cost segregation study. That's really the two differences of what I've seen. Engineering base, we typically work, or myself, I typically work as low as 300,000 on a cost-based property. Main reason because of the fee that's associated, and the tax savings is not going to be as great. But that actually kind of goes into another misconception, right? This doesn't have to be done on multi-million-dollar buildings or hotels, kind of like we've seen in the past, right? I kind of, my bread and butter is actually that $750,000 range to really that $2, $3, $4 million range, depending on the commercial asset type. But within that range of building types, one, the fee is not going to be as high through engineering. You know, you may look at anything on the low side of $4,000 for the study fee, maybe on the high end, 6,500, depending on what actually goes into the study. And that's significant ROI, right? If we look at a $1 million property where the study fee may be $4,000, but their tax savings is 250,000 after 37% tax rate. Probably looking at a little over $100,000 in after-tax benefit. So is it worth paying $4,000 to reduce your tax liability by $100,000? I mean, the ROI
that sounds like a pretty good ROI to get that big of a tax benefit. And I think it was great you shared some of those numbers, Sean, because a lot of people realize when you really reclassify it, you get a really significant tax benefit today. And what that allows you to do, what I see a lot of investors do, is they take that tax savings, and you know what they do? They redeploy it and they go buy more property today that they can again do a cost segregation study on. So it's actually kind of a positive feedback loop, right? Do a cost seg study, get the tax savings, take the money, leverage that, right? Put some financing on, buy a larger property, do a cost segregation study, sit on it for a few years, 1031 exchange out, go into a larger building. So that's kind of the positive feedback loop that I see successful real estate investors using over and over again out in the marketplace.
Exactly. And even for those who, we partner with a lot of experts in the area, CRE realtors, the ones who understand that purpose of how 1031 and cost seg work, they're the biggest advisors for this to their clients. Because, for one, it's a big benefit to them because now they've sold their client a property. They come off as a tax savings hero to them, either by referring cost seg or the 1031 as the exit strategy. Now they're helping that client into a new property. So if you work within the business and you're a realtor or you're a lender, this is probably gold mine for you to be that tax savings hero for those individuals. Okay, so a quick example of how cost segregation and 1031 exchanges really work together. It's kind of, we look here. Let's say, for instance, you're a CRE investor. You just purchased your first multifamily property type, right? You purchased it for $1 million. Now, if we look at the cost segregation analysis versus the straight line approach, we can see that within the first year, my after-tax savings by utilizing the straight line method is going to be just shy of $10,000. Now, this is why cost seg is so advantageous within the early years, because when we compare that to the cost seg side, we can see it's almost 10 times greater than that, right? Almost $100,000 I'm going to receive as an after-tax benefit. So a lot of things that Scott's alluded to with that tax savings, I can now use that cash flow to either one, purchase more property, renovate my current portfolio, or what I tell my clients, take a trip around the world. It's your money. Do as you please. We can see the difference just in that year one is over $80,000 in reducing your tax liability. That's phenomenal, right? So cost seg, accelerated form of depreciation, you're getting that within year one. Straight line is more that accrual based approach. So you'll get the same savings, but you'll have to wait nearly 40 years to receive that. As we said, time value is money. You good?
Yeah, Sean, I'll pipe in. Your number here of 25% is very conservative. I hear people say figure somewhere between 20 to 40% with a lot of cost segregation studies. So you're using a fairly conservative number here. And I mean, that is a massive difference just by doing one study. That's significant dollars in your pocket.
Exactly. And yeah, thanks for actually identifying that too. I like to under promise, over perform. That's, if you ask any of my clients, they're very happy in that. So I'll say, hey, we're going to probably give you 25% when the study's done. They're looking anywhere from 35, 40% plus, depending on the property type. But then here, Scott, actually, I'll hand it over to you. So let's say we've owned this property for now 10, 15 years. We want to get out of it. We've made our basis on it. So we're planning to exit the building, as they say.
Yeah. So you're exiting, if you went with the taxable sale, you would have to pay, and just using rough numbers, having a capital gain of approximately $1 million. And just so everybody knows, again, this is very conservative. When you look at that gain, that's going to include all these different factors in there. So your depreciation over the past 10 years, would be a little higher percentage. Now you're going to exchange up in value. And when most people do 1031 exchanges, if you want 100% deferral, you reinvest your net equity and have the same or greater amount of debt. So to sell an asset for $2 million and then go up in value to 4 million, that's a very common scenario. So this one, the relinquished property is 2 million. What we call the replacement property is a $4 million replacement property. And if you look at it, the cost basis again gets carried over. So you'll see the new cost basis is $3 million. And then Sean, I'll let you kind of unpack the benefit there, because those are some big numbers on that purchase of what a cost segregation study will do.
Yeah. So pick up from the cost basis we see, right? So the reason why the new cost basis is 3 million is because we've already sheltered that 1 million. So we can't take accelerated depreciation on what's already been deferred and sheltered. But still, $3 million cost basis is quite a bit. We can see how significant that is now in the cost seg side. So once again, we compare it to the straight line method, just shy of $30,000. Now we compare it to the cost seg, once again, keeping things similar. So 25% reclass, nearly $300,000 in after-tax savings. That's after tax. That's not before, that's after-tax savings benefits. So if my tax obligation that year is, we'll say $100,000 I owe to the IRS, not only did I wipe that out, but whatever I didn't use, I can now carry over indefinitely until the entire sum of that has been used up. That's phenomenal. And that's why we say the power of these two is so great. I started off with a $1 million property. My first year, I saved myself nearly $100,000. 10 years after the property performed well, we sold, we had a $1 million gain. I've sheltered that $1 million, put it back into a new property, which cost me, really just 3 million. And now I performed a new cost seg, and I've just saved myself again, first year, $300,000 in after-tax savings. So we can see how this just keeps snowballing and snowballing, and why at the end of some CRE investors' lifespan, they just have millions. I mean, they're sitting on literally just a pile of millions of dollars of appreciated property that they now pass off to their heirs tax free.
Yeah, no, it's a great. I really like how you showed some real numbers and kind of a realistic scenario. I think when you actually study these numbers and you see these massive tax benefits with what actually goes into your pocket, I can think of very few reasons why somebody would not want to do this, especially if they're staying in real estate. It just makes all the sense in the world, and your numbers back it up. So, nice job illustrating the benefit of both strategies coupled together there, Sean.
Yeah, appreciate it. The only reason why, or one thing I bring up when I hear, well, why would people not utilize either of these strategies? Well, either you just plain don't like saving money. You take $100 and you light it on fire. I don't know. But in all actuality, right, cost seg does only work for commercial buildings, so you can't do this to your residential home. You could do it for short-term rentals, long-term rentals, so Airbnbs, VRBOs, and you
Yep.
do have to have a tax obligation, right? If you don't have a tax obligation, cost seg is probably not going to be the best. We're already going to be adding depreciation to your depreciation. I mean, it's great and all, but probably not the best there. But as long as you have a tax obligation, you're making money, you want to save money, cost seg, you're looking to exit 1031.
Yep, I think it's great to the tools together. And I'll be honest, Sean, I'm a 1031 expert. I'm actually a real estate investor, and I kind of specialize in the smaller properties, that 1 to 4 unit. I've got 68 assets, and I do cost segregation studies on everything. So it's really beneficial for the commercial investor. But somebody that owns some single family rentals or Airbnb or midterm rentals, they're still going to get the same benefits just on a little smaller number, but percentage wise, it's still going to boost their return and their ROI. So I think anybody, you mentioned, setting money on fire. I say if people want to get out of real estate, if you don't like it as an investment and you think alternatives or the stock market are better, maybe you cash out of your real estate. But I find 90% of real estate investors, once they do real estate investing, they love it and they want to plow more money into more real estate investing. So most people prefer real estate once they get into this asset class, and they just now want to build and grow a portfolio over time. Combining 1031 exchange at disposition with a cost segregation at acquisition or on an existing asset, that is the most tax efficient way to go. And really is what separates those that way outperform versus those that just get ahead slowly.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I appreciate all your input. You definitely have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I'm appreciative that you're able to share that not only with myself, but all the viewers that have tapped into this as well. If anyone does have questions or wants to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, great question. Reach me. I'm at Asset Preservation. Phone number is really easy to remember. It's 800-282-1031. So that's the phone number, 800-282-1031. The website is apiexchange.com. And then my personal email is just my name, Scott at apiexchange.com. I spend most of my day just answering questions, Sean, probably like you do. So reach out anytime. Happy to discuss your specific 1031 exchange scenario, walk through maybe any details or unique factors you may have based upon your individual situation. And then finally, always bounce it off of your tax advisor as well as a reputable qualified intermediary and cost segregation specialist. So we all kind of work in conjunction with one another.
Well said, Scott, and thank you for your expertise. So as a quick recap, what did we learn today? Well, for starters, there are multiple tax saving strategies honored by the IRS. These might be two of the most advantageous for CRA investors. 1031 exchanges and cost segregation have a happy marriage between the two by deferring capital gains and offsetting tax liability. Number two, when is it appropriate to perform either of these strategies? Well, soon after a property has been purchased, feel free to gather your no-cost, non-committal tax savings estimate to see the true advantages cost segregation can bring to your bottom line, as well as seek guidance for a 1031 as the exit strategy to defer your capital gains and roll those gains into another like-kind property. And lastly, Scott did touch upon this earlier, but the key way to create generational wealth is to utilize these tax saving strategies in tandem. Purchase, defer, exchange, repeat indefinitely. You want to purchase the property, defer your tax liability by way of cost seg, and then lastly, utilize a 1031 exchange to shelter those capital gains, and repeat the process to leave your heirs a nice stockpile of real estate. Now, thank you again for listening, and feel free to reach out to Scott or myself.